So tonight we losing this fight, oh help our souls tonight. There's no one on our side who's gonna help our souls tonight. No one here to help.
So we're here today with Ian Young. Ian, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So a little background, Ian Young is a Vancouver correspondent for the South China Morning Post, and you're also the author of the Hongcouver blog and the leading observer in the Vancouver housing crisis here.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Ian, you've written a lot about affordability here in Vancouver. You've written a lot about the Quebec Investors Program.
Yes.
So I kind of want to pick your brain on a couple of those topics here today. So first question I want to ask Ian, what's your background? Like where are you from?
Where am I from? I'm an Australian. I was born in Australia. I'm Chinese Australian. Lived in Hong Kong for about 12 or 13 years. I moved here with my wife, who is a Vancouverite born and bred, Hong Kong Chinese Vancouverite born and bred, in about 2010. So yeah, since 2010 I've been here and looking at this really interesting situation.
Yeah, the only reason why I bring that up is
Sure.
because obviously the race card gets thrown out there quite a bit.
It does.
And so that's why I wanted to get your background, because it's interesting that
Yep.
you've been writing on this stuff, and obviously given your background, just kind of brings.
Oh, absolutely. No, I know it is a very sensitive subject, but I've lived in this environment for a while. Obviously all my family and most of my friends here are ethnically Chinese, and all my colleagues, my bosses in Hong Kong are all ethnically Chinese, pretty much all ethnically Chinese as well. So, it's not an environment that I'm unfamiliar with. It's what I've basically lived with all my life. So.
And again, someone that has kind of mentioned, ending the Quebec Investors Program. Just so everybody knows, so you own real estate here as well, is that correct?
I do, yes. I've got a lovely 3-bedroom townhouse that my wife and I bought in, I think, 2004. It closed around the time we got married.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I certainly haven't missed out. If people think that's what motivates my reporting.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. And obviously the counter argument is always that, okay, well, he's just saying all this stuff so he can buy in at a lower cost, prices come down.
No.
But
well, I mean, that's the thing. You're either always self-interested or you're a hypocrite. It's like, oh, you just worry that you've missed out on the market, or oh, you're so hypocritical. You've got this big house. So I mean, I try to let that stuff slide. I don't think it's relevant.
Exactly. So you have obviously some equity to protect here in the market.
I do, but that's not what motivates my reporting. I think that I just have a very separate sort of mindset. I just don't think that the fact that I own outright a high seven, well, it's now probably it's 7 figures, obviously. I mean, everything's 7 figures now. In equity, that doesn't really influence my reporting. It's got nothing to do with what I do. What I do is separate from what I own. It's got nothing to do with it.
Okay. So obviously just providing an honest voice,
Sure.
and letting people know what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. If the idea is that somehow I'm some tired and weary millennial waiting for the market to crash so that I can snap up a home, no.
Okay. Good to know.
Been here for a while.
Yeah. Okay. So was it back you left Hong Kong in 2010? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you obviously are quite familiar with the Hong Kong market.
Very.
People want to know, is Vancouver heading towards a Hong Kong market, like with prices? I mean, obviously, Vancouver is extremely unaffordable. We know that Hong Kong also has a 15% tax.
Yep. Well,
do you see any similarities? Or?
There are similarities. I think probably the biggest similarity is that Hong Kong and Vancouver are both markets that I think are driven by Chinese money, latterly driven by Chinese money. Hong Kong's market certainly was driven by Chinese money for a very long time, and that was why we saw in I think it was October 2012 or October 2013 the introduction of that 15% stamp duty, which is very analogous to what Christy Clark's done. And the impact of that tax in Hong Kong took a while to kick in, but now we're seeing the Hong Kong market sliding very sharply and quite seriously. Is that to do with the 15% tax? Maybe. There's a lot of other domestic factors, and obviously China's economy has a lot to do with it as well.
Did you notice any immediate change in the market when they implemented that 15% tax? I don't know. Obviously, you weren't there at the time.
The immediate changes that were an awful lot of real estate agents actually hitting the streets and protesting. There are actually quite large protests organised of the thousands of real estate agents in Hong Kong hitting the streets with placards and everything. So there wasn't this same sense of denialism that we see in Vancouver, you know, where there's still, for a lot of people, I think the jury is still out on foreign money. At least a lot of people in government, up until recently, the jury had been out. But in Hong Kong, I don't think I ever met anyone who discounted the idea that foreign money, at least mainly Chinese money, was what was driving the market. And the same as here in Vancouver. I don't really know of any Chinese Vancouverites who dispute the notion that Chinese money is driving the market or has been driving the market. That's taken as a given in a way that it is not, it hasn't always been taken as a given in the domestic English-speaking media.
Okay.
Well, that's changing as well now, though, too.
Yeah. So getting like back into Vancouver, like, what do you personally see as being the biggest cause for unaffordability here?
The biggest cause.
Like, if you could single out. Maybe,
Well, I mean, all right. There's a couple.
Or do you have a couple factors?
There are a few factors, but I think when we talk about affordability, it's about incomes and prices, okay? And it's about that gap between prices and domestic income. That's all it is. So what foreign money does to that is that it breaks that connection. Money that comes from outside of Vancouver, whether that's actually from the oil patch or from Hong Kong or from China, it doesn't matter. Money that is earned outside of Vancouver skews that market, skews that connection rather, and we see this detachment. So yeah, I do think that foreign money, and I think of that specifically, Chinese money, is probably the biggest exogenous factor. I say exogenous because obviously interest rates play a role, supply play a role, but those things didn't change. Those things didn't, for instance, supply didn't collapse in 2015.
Yeah.
Supply rose to record levels, you know, at least in terms of builds and new builds and things like that, and new listings. Look at rates. Rates didn't fall through the floor last year. The rate regime didn't change, not really. But then we see what happened to prices last year in 2015. Similarly, if we look at things like rates affect the country as a whole and affect most of the world in the same way. But not everywhere in Canada and not everywhere in the world has Vancouver's experience of what happened last year.
Yeah.
So if you look for these trigger factors, then I do think foreign money, and specifically Chinese money outflows, are the big exogenous factor.
So what do you think of the 15% tax that was imposed?
I think it was introduced very hastily. I'd say that. I'd say that in terms of once the decision was made, they're going to introduce a tax that came in very quickly. I shouldn't say that it was hasty because they've had many years to get on top of this. I would also say straight off the bat, it should have been grandfathered.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was. That's what
I think that regardless of who these buyers are, people are being hurt in a way that I think is a bit unfair because these are people who've signed up to deals, buyers and sellers, and now they've had this tax dropped on top of them. I think that the retroactive nature of it, effectively retroactive nature of it, is unfair. Having said that, something had to be done. The fact that this tax is supported by 80 or 90% of the people shows that the public wanted something to be done. I don't think the tax is perfect. I think it would have been better to somehow index it, penalties and taxes and whatever, on based upon earnings, based upon declared income, for instance. And
so something like David Eby was mentioning?
Both David Eby and I think Tom Davidoff and a lot of other people have actually talked about trying to index a tax to income and to Canadian declared income we're talking about here. So the people who are dodging tax and people who are, relying on not paying their taxes, they should be hit. And that would, at the same, firstly it would tackle with those exogenous forces that externally earned money. At the same time, it wouldn't have this stir up this whole hornet's nest about race and ethnicity and about nationality. The citizenship of a buyer really shouldn't. That's not what drives affordability. What passport someone has. What drives affordability is where they earn their money. That's what drives it.
Do you, obviously having the Chinese background.
Yes.
Do you feel like this tax is kind of prejudiced?
No, I don't think it's prejudiced. I think that prejudiced people will jump on it and applaud it. And I think that people who fear prejudice will criticise it. But I don't think the tax inherently is prejudiced. I mean, I think that a lot of places have introduced these sort of taxes, and I don't think, for instance, that those places are all acting out of prejudice. I think that.
Do you know what's the sentiment amongst like other Chinese people? Is it?
For instance, even if we look, what's Vancouver is like high 20s or 30% Chinese.
I think West Richmond 75%.
It's actually, I think it's just over 50% because it includes Seafair and places like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean number 3 road in Richmond is 80% Chinese.
Okay, yeah, I guess
that
I
area.
don't know how they talk with the stats, but
anyway,
I know more last year they haven't.
Sure. Anyway, we're talking about a city that's like what 30% Chinese-ish, something like that. But at the same time, you've got 90% support for the tax. So you do the math. You tell me that. There's not some groundswell of Chinese opinion that is opposed to this tax. That's simply not true.
Yeah.
That's simply not true.
Interesting. Okay, so and you've also been talking a lot about the Quebec Investors Program, and that's one of the main things I really want to talk to you about today.
Sure.
So for anyone watching this, can you kind of explain it a little bit further, take us back?
Okay. Well, we'll go back to
what exactly is it?
the deep dark history of Canada-Quebec relations. Canada-Quebec Accord allows Quebec to decide who its immigrants are going to be. In the mid-80s, it introduced this scheme called the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program. What that is, it's a scheme under which Quebec gets to charge immigrants now $800,000. That isn't just a fee. What happens is that money is actually a loan, an interest-free loan that's made to the Quebec government. So what Quebec gets is basically cheap money. It works out to about $100,000 or whatever. And in exchange, the investor, who gets that $800,000 back at the end of a 5-year period, they get permanent residency for themselves and their dependents. And that obviously leads to citizenship. That's the goal. The whole goal is citizenship. So basically what it is, it's a citizenship selling scheme. There was a federal version of the scheme, which ran in parallel. That was shut down in 2014.
Yeah.
But the Quebec scheme was always bigger. Now, the glitch here is that even though applicants to this scheme must declare that they intend to live in Quebec, when they arrive, there is absolutely nothing to stop them from leaving and moving to Vancouver, for instance. And it is almost impossible to enforce, because to enforce it requires proving a deception of intent. So that while technically speaking this is a fraud to do this, how do you prove that someone didn't just change their mind? For instance, you can simply arrive in Canada and say, I actually prefer Vancouver. I think I'll settle in Vancouver instead. Perfectly legal. So what you see
Does
is...
Quebec, do they have anything against that?
No, well, Quebec
are you supposed to stay in Quebec?
Absolutely, you are supposed to stay in Quebec, but it is impossible to prevent them from moving. Quebec would obviously prefer that these wealthy investors come to Quebec and drop their money there and set up businesses and lives and households in Quebec.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it comes down to not getting the $800,000 and getting it, they're going to take it. And so this is a scheme that's brought literally tens of thousands of people to Vancouver. Literally tens of thousands. And it has a big impact. I think that in terms of future impact, we're talking about 1,400 to 1,500 households, multi-millionaire households arriving in Vancouver every year for the foreseeable future because of the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, right? People can say okay, well, how many of them actually come in and buy houses? But when you think about it, if someone's coming in with that kind of money, these are
multi-millionaires. That's right. The government stopped telling us exactly how much they were worth back in the 90s. But what we do know is that in the early 90s... No, I don't know. I think because it was pretty embarrassing information, because that's one way of looking at it. But in the early 90s, these immigrants whose benchmark wealth back then was only $800,000. That was the benchmark wealth. The benchmark wealth is now 1.6 million. Anyway, back then when the benchmark wealth was only 800,000, their actual wealth was between 2 and 2.5 million. This is back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. And we all know how in terms of the growth of millionaires and the growth of wealth in the last couple of decades. So you don't have to be too imaginative to think that, okay, we're talking about high millionaires, here.
It's going to be.
And a lot of them are very high millionaires, and in fact there's a couple of billionaires coming out of it as well. Let's talk, there was a great story that Sam Cooper of the Province wrote recently involving the man behind Suncom, a guy named Kevin Sun, arrived via Vancouver. Arrived via Quebec, rather.
So he came through that program.
Well, he arrived via Quebec, and pretty much the only way for someone like Mr. Sun to get to Quebec is via the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's setting up businesses in Quebec. And we know that he's dropped $500 million on Vancouver real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, I think it's a significant factor.
Yeah. Okay. So implementing this, do you know what the government is currently doing to kind of? I know
the BC
now
government.
I know they finally kind of raised the red flag.
That's right. I think at the last Premier's meeting, Christy Clark said that she raised the matter with Quebec's Premier, and he heard her, and that they're going to work together on trying to make the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program work for Quebec and not funnel all these millionaires to Vancouver.
What would you like to see done? Do you want it to be cut off completely, or cut that number in half?
A couple of weeks ago, I wrote something hyperbolically, which called for the complete elimination of the program, because I think it's terrible. My personal point of view is that selling passports is a bad idea, and especially selling them in this way, where the applicants pledge to live in Quebec. Quebec gets all the money, or at least all the loans, and then the people just bail and head to Vancouver, or 66% head to Vancouver, or 2/3 head to Vancouver, and 1/3 heads to Toronto. So it's a particularly egregious program. For that reason, I think it should be shut down. I don't think that's going to happen. Because it's a big money spinner it's a good money spinner for Quebec, and Quebec's got.
Well, does it seem like the federal government's too kind of keen on doing something, right?
The federal government could actually shut it down if it wanted. It could do that not by forcing Quebec to change the program. It could do that because the federal government is actually the one that issues the visas. Even though the Quebec government makes the recommendation, the actual one that hands over the visa, the certificate of permanent residency, is the federal government. And they could, through technical means, they could simply choke off approved visa issuance to force Quebec to de facto shut down the scheme. Again, I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think there's any particular hunger for Quebec federal government's stoush at this stage. So the other alternative, if we're not going to talk about shutting it down, which is my preferred option, but I don't think it's going to happen, is to modify the scheme in some way. And one interesting way that Richard Kurland, a very well-informed immigration lawyer here in Vancouver, has suggested is to make getting your money back, getting your $800,000 back, contingent upon living in Quebec for a certain period of time and filing Canadian tax returns. And I think that's actually not a bad solution.
Yeah. I feel like $800,000 enough of a deterrent to keep someone in Quebec? And when you're a multi-millionaire?
It depends. You're right. There are some people for whom that money will not deter them, the loss of that money. But we are talking about a lot of middle-class millionaires. We're talking about middle-class millionaires, people who are worth $10 million. And you wouldn't be happy about losing $800,000. I mean, and on top of that, whatever interest you lost during the 5 years that you had the money turned over in the first place. So it's a pretty big penalty. I think, let me put it this way, I think that it would serve as a deterrent, a strong deterrent, and it would reduce the attractiveness of the scheme, because then people might start looking at other things, for instance, like moving to the United States under an EB-5 visa, which is another sort of immigration by investment program, or to any of the other places that offer immigration by investment, like places in Europe. There's Portugal, for instance, things like that. Britain also offers it, but at a very high price benchmark. Australia offers it, but with a very high price benchmark. $5 million, something like that.
What do you say to the counter argument? Because obviously the counter argument is, well, Canada, particularly BC, is so dependent and really needs like the foreign money coming in as as an investment for the economy.
Well, I mean, I think people shouldn't argue with the point that the real estate industry and the development industry are the prime movers of the BC economy.
Oh, pretty much all Canada. You look at it like
construction,
Vancouver, and
real
Toronto.
estate. Well, I mean, these are linchpins of the economy. Okay, I think it's valid to make that point of view. I think it's valid to say that the risks involved in trying to address affordability, that is, let's be honest, bring down prices. The risks are too great, and that it is more important to protect the equity of existing homeowners as well. I think that's a valid point of view. I don't disagree with it, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with that point of view, but I think it's valid. What I think is invalid is to deny the role of Chinese money, and foreign money, which is supported very strongly by peer-reviewed evidence and a long, really long body of study that is whose existence is often denied by people who are more supply-siders and want to see this as a supply-driven argument. So what I don't see as valid is denying the impact of foreign money on the market. I think that people should be allowed to make up their own minds about where they stand on that issue based on the best evidence, based on the best information. And I hope that's what my reporting does, is that it provides people with more information about what actually has created this world, what actually has created Vancouver's unaffordability crisis, and what, there are a lot of people who have benefited greatly from this influx of money. And that shouldn't, that the existence of those people shouldn't be denied. But what I'm concerned about is that people have the best available information. And that's what they base their decisions on.
So personally, do you feel the pros outweigh the cons to shut down the program?
Well, I don't think it comes down to shut down the Quebec program.
Oh,
I think,
because you know what I mean. Like
obviously,
so for the economy, like here, it might take a hit. But
I think for me, specifically talking about the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program, I think that it should be shut down. I think that it's not just a question of whether it's good or bad for the economy. I think it's a question of ethics. I think it's an unethical program. It sends an awful message about how Canada values Canadian residency and Canadian citizenship. Think about what sort of message that sends to someone when they can walk in and buy Canadian residency and de facto
citizenship. The sense
citizenship.
that Canada's kind of selling itself out.
Absolutely, and I don't think that's not so much an economic question. That's a question of how Canada sees itself being presented to the world. How do Canadians see themselves? Do Canadians see themselves as people who sell their nationality? Is nationality something that can be bought and sold? Should it be bought and sold? Now, a lot of countries have these programs, but Canada has always been very, very popular, the most popular one for many years.
And then you have obviously the counter argument that Canada's always been this welcoming, friendly country. And
absolutely, it can be. I mean, if we talk about the value of the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program and the value of immigration as a whole, I mean, obviously I'm an immigrant. Now, immigration, not just to Canada, but to pretty much anywhere, should be premised on one of, or both of, two things. It should either be compassionate, or it should be of economic benefit to the host country. That's it. Now, you look at all the family reunion, spousal, refugee, all of those sort of visas, compassionate. All the other ones, skilled worker, investor, entrepreneur, provincial nominee, are intended to be of economic benefit to Canada and to the provinces that apply them. This scheme, the immigrant investor scheme as a whole, is of demonstrably bugger all benefit to the Canadian economy. Immigrant investors as a whole average $1,400 in income tax per year. $1,400. I thought that was a typo when I first saw it. $1,400 per year. Earnings are about the same level, declared earnings in Canada.
So they're declaring $1,400.
That's the actual income tax they paid.
Okay.
Their declared earnings are on a level with refugees.
Okay.
Okay. And it's not just the principal applicants, the breadwinners here, who declare bugger all. The next generation, the dependents, go on to declare below average incomes, which is extremely unusual when you're looking at these children of multi-millionaires.
How does someone tackle that problem? Like, is that something that David Eby and Tom David are getting back to with?
For instance, once someone has arrived as an immigrant in Canada, I think it would be grossly unfair to try to impose any new changes or restrictions upon them, because I think that immigration is a contract between the country and the immigrant. It's a contract. It's not a one-way street. It's not just about responsibilities of the immigrant. Canada has a responsibility to protect the rights of immigrants, and they shouldn't be singled out for taxes or any other new impost, anything like that. However, that is not to say that Canada has any responsibility whatsoever to foreign millionaires. We've shown, I think, that the immigrant investor programs are of demonstrably no economic benefit to Canada in terms of long term. What we see is real estate purchasing. Real estate purchasing, that's about it. And I think that, as we've seen in Vancouver, that's not a uniformly good thing. And the second way of looking at it is, what compassionate duty does Canada have to a foreign millionaire? And I think clearly the answer is none. Canada has no responsibility whatsoever in compassionate terms to foreign millionaires. Zero.
Okay. Yeah, so basically what you're saying is they come in, $800,000, they get their money back.
Yes.
And then, so it's great that, I guess you get cheap money somewhat.
Some cheap money. It's not actually that much money, $800,000. I mean, what are we talking about? A 1% interest rate regime these days. Really, I'm pretty sure Quebec could source this money pretty easily. I don't think that it's that big of a deal. But then it's easy money is what it is.
Exactly.
Easy money.
And then then move to Vancouver and buy the expensive house and then not pay any tax here, which really ultimately hurts our economy in the long term if you're not paying any income tax.
I mean, as I said, this is, I think, is the fundamental. By definition, that's what can drive unaffordability, is this detachment between prices, between home purchasing power and locally declared income. That's what unaffordability is.
Okay, so then so you're saying about roughly 1,400 people.
1,400 to 1,500 people will be arriving under this scheme for the foreseeable future, because we know what the caps are. We know that Quebec has put in a limit of 1,750 for applicants in 2014 and 2015. The limit is now 1,900. They actually increased it a couple of months ago, so it's 1,900 families per year. Looking forwards. On top of that, you've got a backlog, which was at about 3,000 families last year. So add a couple hundred more to that. So when you cut it down to about 2/3 ending up here, it's 1,400 or 1,500 households arriving ad infinitum.
So let's go with that number, and then just say, okay, well, now the counter argument is, okay, well, if it's only 1,400 people coming in, how much can that actually affect the prices? Okay,
well, it depends what you regard as a typical year. This is as I said, this is ad infinitum. We're talking about these 1,400 or 1,500 households. In a typical year, last year and this year aren't typical year, what are we talking? 30,000 transactions in Metro Vancouver?
Yeah.
Okay, 30,000. So what's that, 5%? 5% of high forward, maybe, we'll say 5% of the market, if these households buy one home upon arrival. Okay. What sort of home is it? Everything we know about immigrant investors and multi-millionaires is that they buy extremely expensive homes.
Yeah.
Very few people dispute the notion that these overseas millionaires, or at least immigrant millionaires, are focused very strongly in the west side of Vancouver. Average price of a home in west side Vancouver now, $4 million.
Yeah.
Okay? The real estate board doesn't talk about that number. Average price, about $4 million. And so all of a sudden, that 5%, if they're buying $4 million homes, represent a much greater portion of the market.
Yeah.
What's the average? What's the average all residential price in Vancouver? Something like $800,000. Okay, something like that. 800, is it 900? Something.
I think it's
anyway,
900.
let's just say they're spending 4 or 5 times as much as the average sale. All of a sudden, that 4 or 5% doesn't look like 4 or 5% anymore. It looks like closer to 15, 20, 25% of the dollar value of the market. Okay, it's not just when they first arrive though, because the quirk is that for their lifetimes, immigrant investors do not earn locally. Okay, so an immigrant investor household doesn't just buy a home when they arrive. Maybe 10 years down the track, they buy another house.
Yeah.
Maybe or move sideways or whatever. It's not even a question of cashing out and cashing in. It's a question of what portion of sales this constitutes.
I think like culturally, Chinese like real estate.
There are a lot of.
It's a popular investment.
Dirt is popular. Dirt is very popular among ethnic Chinese. I think pretty much all around the world. And the other impact is, when a Quebec or an immigrant investor hands over their $4 million to Granny on Canby Street, what do you think happens to that money?
Yeah.
Does that just sit in the bank account?
No, it's all a trickle effect. It goes to buy condos for
Right.
the
So
grandchildren.
how many subsequent purchases are then funded entirely or to a great extent by that foreign money?
Yeah, no, it's
That
an
money remains
interesting way to
foreign.
look at it for sure.
Sure. And so I think that when people say, 5% of the market, it's only 5% of the market. 5% of the sales initially, yes, but because of the snowball effect, because the 100,000 plus immigrant investors who have previously arrived in Vancouver, I think 120,000 or something like that,
Yeah.
they continue to buy. They are the bigger buying factor than the new 1,400 or 1,500.
Okay.
And they continue to earn overseas. Now, it is that makes it very slow to wind down. It makes it very, very, even if you cut off the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program right now, even those applicants that have just been applying in the past year, they'll still be arriving in the next 3 or 4 years because that's how long it takes to apply to process applications. I don't think anyone's talking about throwing out the applications that have already been made. So it's a process that goes on not just for years, it goes on for decades and decades, and that's what we see.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I can definitely see it. It's just like counter argument, right? Like I think
Absolutely.
it's just a way of looking at it.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people are, you can obviously be narrow-minded. I think everyone has to look at the grand scheme of things and be open to all sorts of things. And I think that you brought up some very good points. So I want to get towards wrapping it up.
Sure.
Basically, my question is, well, I know that how much, so, we cut off, say, we end the program tomorrow, you cut off 1,400 people potentially coming in, long-term window. I know Tom Davidoff was quoted as saying that he potentially could see, a decrease in prices of 4 to 10% here in Vancouver. Do you feel the same way? Do you have any kind of guesses?
You're talking about on the basis of the Immigrant Investor Program?
Yeah, so if you were to cut that
I wouldn't want to put a number on it. Tom would know better than me because he's an economist. I wouldn't want to put a number on it. I just don't know. What I do know is there's an awful lot of money that's sloshing around that's entirely due to the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program. And it's not just about arrivals this year, it's about how that money will affect the future of the market.
And of course the ethics of it.
Of course the ethics of it. The ethics of it are really appalling. It's a horrible program.
Okay. And then, just to kind of wrap it up,
Sure.
Ultimately, what would you like to see BC or the Canadian government take actions, and how can I think one of the questions from one of the guys on Twitter was basically how can we lobby for the government to kind of take some steps?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm a journalist. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not an advocate. That's not where I'm coming from. What I want to see is people to be well informed. I want people to see exactly what's driving the market and to make their own decisions about what they want the market and what they want Vancouver to be in the future. And I think that needs to be made from best information. And I hope that's what I do.
Okay. Awesome. Well,
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks a lot, Ian. Appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.